Gardner to move the motion.
It's a pleasure to see you in the chair for this debate, Mr. Vickers. I know how important these matters are to your constituents in Brigg and Immingham, as they are to mine in Brent West. I beg to move that this House has considered the matter of government policies to limit global deforestation. Now, it may seem strange to start a debate on policies to combat deforestation by speaking about rivers, but I want to pose a challenge to colleagues this morning to see if any of them can name the largest river on the planet. And I'll happily give way to anyone who thinks they can.
Is it the Plate?
No. It's not the Plate, it's not the River Nile, and it's not the Amazon River. No, but if you thought it was the Amazon, you're getting close. The river I'm speaking of is actually, for the most part, invisible. Invisible and airborne. Every day, 20 billion cubic meters of water, that is 20 billion metric tons of water, is pushed up into the atmosphere by the forests of the Amazon basin. That water doesn't stay in the atmosphere, of course. It's not like evaporation from the oceans. It's generated by a unique combination of the organic forest interacting with the inorganic atmosphere. It's seeded with microscopic spores of pollen and fungi, and these make the Amazonian clouds heavy, and that means all that water rains back down across the continent, replenishing the forest itself and irrigating a landmass that otherwise would probably be a desert. The Amazon River, as we know it, all 4,000 miles of it, pours just 17 billion tons of water into the Atlantic Ocean every day, so the invisible river of transpiration beats it by 3 billion tons a day. Imagine the power it takes to push 20 billion tons up into the atmosphere. On Brazil's border with Paraguay is the Itaipu Dam, the second most powerful hydroelectric power station in the world after the Three Gorges Dam in China. Itaipu's capacity is 14 megawatts. That's about 4.5 times the capacity of Hinkley Point C if Hinkley ever manages to get built. You would need 5,000 Itaipu power stations just to push up the 20 billion tons of water into the atmosphere that forest does every single day. Forests are amazing. The Amazon is not alone, of course. The second lungs of our planet is the Congo Basin in Africa. And while we're talking about famous dams, it's worth noting that the Aswan Dam, some 2,000 miles away, relies for 85% of its power on water that the Congo forest transpiration has deposited into the Ethiopian highlands, coming down through the Nile to Aswan. Forests are amazing. Or to be a little more scientific about it, forest ecosystems provide critical and diverse services to human society. They're a primary habitat for a wide range of species. They support biodiversity and conservation. Forest growth sequesters and stores carbon from the atmosphere. It contributes to regulation of the global carbon cycle, mitigates climate change. Healthy forests produce soil and conserve it. They stabilize stream flows and water runoff, preventing land degradation and desertification. Forests reduce the risks of natural disasters such as droughts, floods and landslides. They contribute to poverty eradication, to economic development by providing food, fibre, timber and other forest products for subsistence and income generation. They're a key genetic source for the pharmaceutical industry, contributing to global human health. And they even serve as sites of aesthetic, recreational and spiritual values in so many cultures. So you see, forests may be home to 80% of land species, but they're also absolutely vital to the survival of our own. They produce 40% of the oxygen we breathe. They support 1.6 billion livelihoods, and they play a crucial role in holding back a climate disaster on a massive scale. So, what about deforestation? It's been happening for a very long time. In fact, since the end of the last ice age, the world has lost 1/3 of all its forests. That's about 2 billion hectares, 2 United States of Americas. But even though it's been happening for about 11,000 years, the rate of acceleration is really rather recent and incredibly alarming. More than half of all the forest lost since the Pleistocene has happened in the last 125 years. 1.1 billion hectares gone. The drivers of deforestation are well known. Agricultural expansion remains the single largest cause, and according to the FAO, is responsible for 88% of global deforestation. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says it contributes 11% of global CO2 emissions. Similarly, in its report on deforestation in January of last year, the Environmental Audit Committee identified what we might call the 7 deadly sins of deforestation, the 7 commodities that are driving 90% of global deforestation: beef and leather, soy, timber, palm oil, paper, rubber, and cocoa. But the EAC was only picking up on the GRI Task Force's recommendations from 2020. And here I want to commend the previous Conservative government for establishing the Global Resource Initiative, which they set up under the chairmanship of Sir Ian Cheshire as part of the 25-year Environment Plan. Sir Ian realised that if the market was to transition to sustainable commodity supply chains, it would need government to adopt a strategic, coordinated approach to align and accelerate action. And I have to say that the government's response to the task force's 14 recommendations showed real understanding of the issues. When nature's free services fail, they said, the poorest people suffer first and worst. Over 1 billion people rely directly on forests for their livelihoods, including indigenous peoples who look after around 80% of the biodiversity. They went on. Protecting and restoring mangroves, forests and peatlands could provide around 1/3 of the most cost-effective climate change solutions we need, while supporting species and helping communities adapt to become more resilient. Shifting towards more sustainable forms of agriculture would not only protect the planet's lungs, but it could add a further $2.3 trillion in productive growth to the global economy and create a further 200 million jobs by 2050. We know there is no pathway to net zero emissions, or indeed the Sustainable Development Goals, that does not involve protecting and restoring nature on an unprecedented scale. But despite the huge contribution nature can make, it attracts just 3% of global climate finance. Now, I suspect that the excellence of that written response is directly attributable to the noble Lord Goldsmith, but an excellence of understanding requires an excellence of follow-through. Well, that was less excellent. It's true that in response to the task force's recommendation to mobilize a global call for action to tackle deforestation and build sustainable commodity supply chains in the lead up to COP26, the Johnson government did deliver. Well, they did deliver a call to action, but a call to action and action are 2 different things. Yes, more than 100 global leaders signed up to the pledge to halt deforestation by 2030, and yes, 30 financial institutions managing nearly 9 trillion in assets between them promised to disclose the deforestation risk and mitigation activities in their portfolios by 2023, and to eliminate harmful practices from their portfolios by 2025. But 23 has come and gone. Today, it is 2025, and we're still not eating the guilt-free chocolate that's carbon guilt-free, not calorie guilt-free, that Boris Johnson boasted about. And we're nowhere near on track to halting forest loss by 2030. One of the things that fuels people's disillusionment with politics is that so much fanfare surrounds policy announcements, but so little of the hard graft of delivery gets done after the announcements have been made. You see, the public understands that our own diets and supply chains are deeply entwined in this issue. We may not see the bulldozers or the farmers who are eking out a living with slash and burn, but the products we consume every day, from chocolate bars to cooking oils, link us directly to the deforestation we say we want to stop. If we told the public that we had just destroyed the entire new forest, they'd be horrified. Yet that is the area of forest that our failure to enact the due diligence recommendations has eradicated since 2021. And with that knowledge comes the understanding that we are complicit. But there's only so much that people can do by their own individual action and choices. That's why the task force's recommendations about a due diligence obligation was so important. It said that the government should urgently introduce a mandatory due diligence obligation on companies that place commodities and derived products that contribute to deforestation on the UK market, and to take action to ensure similar principles are applied to the finance industry. That due diligence obligation would require companies to analyse the presence of environmental and human rights risks and impacts within their supply chains, take action to prevent or mitigate those risks, and publicly report on actions taken and planned. The financial sector would also be covered by a similar mandatory due diligence obligation, requiring them to exercise due diligence in order to ensure that their lending and investments did not fund deforestation. The task force demanded action. In the Environment Act 2021, it got a pale version of it. The Act introduced measures to prohibit UK businesses from using commodities grown illegally on illegally deforested or occupied land. At the COP28 summit in Dubai in 23, the UK delegation announced the list of commodities that could be included in the environmental law, and explained that businesses with more than £50 million in global annual turnover and using more than 500 metric tons of commodities per year would need to source from land they could prove wasn't illegally forested. Whilst well-intentioned, by focusing on legality, it failed to hold out an absolute standard of whether the supply chain was in fact involved in deforestation, and ignored the fact that politicians like Jair Bolsonaro would simply change their domestic legislation to grant legal status to what had previously been illegally deforested land, and so get round the Act's intention. This failure to impose adequate due diligence on companies, banks and finance houses and institutions has meant that since the Glasgow Declaration, UK banks have provided over £1 billion to companies that present a forest risk. And last July, UK investors still held £1.4 billion worth of assets and shares issued by these companies. The largest 50 of these investors make up 99% of the total UK forest risk investments, and yet 18 of them were actually signatories to the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. Sadly, just 8 have made any clear public commitment to eventually removing deforestation from their portfolios. That leaves 42 who should be ashamed of themselves. Perhaps 3 names stand out, but for all the wrong reasons. HSBC, Barclays, and Standard Chartered. Between them, these 3 banks have provided 97% of the £4.5 billion worth of credit lines for forest risk companies since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. And it's not just in government where there's a gap between policy and action. In 2017, HSBC committed, and I quote, not to provide services to customers either directly or indirectly involved in deforestation. Well, in fact, they've provided credit lines amounting to £1.9 billion to forest risk companies. Forest risk companies like JBS, the world's largest meat company, which, despite a record of corruption and forest destruction, has just last week been approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission to list on the New York Stock Exchange, giving it access to new sources of finance and capital markets. This, of course, is just a few months since JBS dropped its net zero by 2040 climate pledge, claiming, well, it was never a formal commitment. The Environment Act was an important marker that the UK takes seriously its role in the global supply chain, that it wants to lead the way and to manage responsibility that comes with it. But a marker only stands in place of action for so long, and 4 years later it has become an ironic sign of failure. UK financial institutions continue to bankroll deforestation. Trade agreements lack meaningful environmental safeguards, and indigenous land defenders face daily violence and intimidation. Unsustainable logging fuels forest destruction, weak governance and corruption continue, and infrastructure projects and mining operations further encroach on forested lands, fragmenting ecosystems and threatening indigenous territories. Land tenure insecurity, poor enforcement, and a lack of economic alternatives all conspire to make deforestation a systemic problem. There can be no one silver bullet, but my goodness, there must be a desire to start. With COP30 this November being hosted in Brazil, there is a compelling case to move from intention to delivery. First, the Minister knows only too well that we must urgently expand the due diligence regime to cover all forest risk commodities, whether legal or illegal, under producer country law. We should introduce criminal liability for companies knowingly profiting from deforestation and require UK banks and investors to disclose their deforestation risk. There will need to be a phased timeline, but the question I have for her is not when it will be done, but why it hasn't been done already. If we understand where the blockage in the machinery is, perhaps we can help apply a bit of pressure to assist her in getting it done. And I know she'll be keen to do so. Some say the blockage is in the Cabinet Office. Some say Northern Ireland and the Windsor Framework. I'd only point out to her and her ministerial colleagues that the strong due diligence measures of the European deforestation legislation are due to come into force in December of this year. And it would be best if the regulation of the whole of the UK were consonant with it. So can the Minister set out a clear timeline for the full implementation of Schedule 17 of the Environment Act? Second, the UK must champion a trade model that values environmental protection and human rights. As the UK is in advanced trade negotiations with the EU and India, and to a lesser extent with the USA, I would ask the Minister what discussions she's had with her colleagues in the Department of Business and Trade about the need to embed deforestation safeguards and environmental standards in all future trade agreements. And I would immodestly recommend to her the blueprint set out in the Labour Party's Green Paper entitled Just Trading back in 2018, when I was the Shadow Trade Secretary on this point. Third, the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, the TFFF, championed by Brazil, will inevitably assume centre stage as we progress towards Belém and COP30. By using arbitrage between the cost of long-dated government bonds and loans and the returns of a more diversified portfolio, the fund seeks to provide a long-term payment for conservation and restoration of tropical forests. The facility would help to address a significant market failure, placing a value to the ecosystem services that those forests provide and returning that to the forest communities that curate them. My question to the Minister is, how will the UK be involved in the TFFF? What have been her conversations with colleagues in international development? And how will the fund prioritise and reward the role of Indigenous and traditional knowledge partners in forest stewardship? She knows Indigenous peoples need specific legal protections, recognition and direct funding. Forests thrive when Indigenous rights are upheld. Our aid and climate finance must prioritise these locally led solutions. This is fundamental not just for nature and climate mitigation, but for justice, for addressing poverty and for human rights. The establishment at the CBD COP16 meeting in Rome of the Cali Fund, which commits 50% of its resources to indigenous communities, was an overdue recognition of their role as custodians of forests and the nature and biodiversity that make them up. I would ask the Minister to update the House about the steps our government is taking to help operationalise that fund and to ensure that its resources reach those local communities quickly and without loss. Can she tell us whether and how indigenous communities are represented on the fund's board of management, for example? And how will the Cali Fund work alongside the TFFF? Can she tell us whether the UK is planning to invest in the TFFF? And now, with the 40% cut in ODA from 0.5 to just 0.3% of GNI, what is going to happen to the 11.6 billion that was ring-fenced for climate in ICF3 and the 3 billion within that was further ring-fenced for nature? After years of declining indicators, we now have an opportunity to reverse the trend of deforestation. I'm proud of the direction our Labour government has taken since July, from creating a special envoy for nature to committing to deliver 3 new national forests. Domestically, the government is investing up to 400 million in tree planting and peat restoration over the 24-25 and 25-26 period. But if we are to lead globally, we must also act globally, and that includes how we mobilise capital. Public funding is crucial, but on its own it's not enough. We need to unlock private finance to support conservation and sustainable development, especially in regions safeguarding the planet's remaining great forests. That means scaling up tools like green bonds, blended finance, and debt for nature swaps. That means the City of London can and should be a hub for this kind of innovation, not only for climate finance, but for nature-positive finance. We sometimes hear the environment and the economy pitted against each other, Mr. Vickers, as if nature is a subset of the economy. Of course, the truth is the other way round. Without nature and the ecosystem services it provides, there is no economy. And the most vital part of that nature is our amazing forests. I beg to move.
If they wish to be called in the debate. I won't impose a formal time limit at the moment, but I will be called in the front benches at 10:28. So Jim Shannon will show us how it's done. The question is that the House has considered government policies to limit global deforestation. Jim Shannon.
Pleasure to serve under your chairship, and you've set me the challenge for myself personally, and it's one I'll adhere to. Can I thank, first of all, the Honourable Member for Brent North for leading today's debate. In my time in this Parliament, the Honourable gentleman has always shown himself to be enthusiastic and energetic in these subject matters, and always speaks, Mr. Chairman, with a knowledge and that we appreciate. I appreciate it anyway. I think we all do, to be fair. And today he has exemplified that incredibly well. So thank him for that, and for reminding us, by the way, reminding all of us, including myself, of the importance of these types of debate. Deforestation has been and is posed as a massive global issue for quite some time. And it is sad when we listen to the Honourable Member's introduction and the things that we've read in relation to it. And looking forward to hearing from the Minister on a way forward, as we always look to getting things right and better and doing better as well. And just to start, Mr. Chairman, to give some insight into our local situation regarding, although this is a global deforestation, but just to give some factors for us back home, because it adds to what we're doing here in relation to deforestation. Approximately 8.6% of Northern Ireland's land area is covered by woodland, which is amongst the lowest in Europe, and between 2000 and 2023, Northern Ireland lost some 21.7 thousand hectares of natural forests, representing 11% decrease. So there is more that we can do back home as well. I declare an interest as a landowner and a farmer, and we did and have planted some 15 odd years ago or there, but maybe 20 years ago it might be now, some 4,500 trees. So it's a small part that we play, or I've played and my family have played in relation to that. And the storms do take their toll, but I'm glad to say out of 4,500 trees we only lost 12, and they've been replaced. So that's what we do. The United Kingdom has approximately 3.25 million hectares of woodland, accounting for about 13% of the total land area. So the impacts of deforestation are often underestimated. Mr. Chairman, the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee, who have done an incredible job, concluded that the forest hosts some 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity and supports the livelihood of some 1.6 billion people, 25% of the world's total population. So the importance of forests for a quarter of the world's population is incredible, and 90% of the world's population who live in extreme poverty as well. So the impact upon them is greater than ever, and they depend on forests for some part of their livelihood. Poverty is a massive issue across the globe, and ultimately, once forests and trees are removed, the resources thousands of people required to survive are destroyed. We've just been reminded about that 500-year-old tree, I think it was, in London. It was cut down. When you cut it down, you just can't grow it the next day. When you cut down that tree, there's a court case ongoing, so I'm not saying too much, but it's ongoing as well. When you cut down that tree, you just can't plant it the next day and get it back to where it was. So those are the things that we've got to remember. The resources of thousands of people required to survive are destroyed. The same report stated that if we, the United Kingdom, are a significant consumer of commodities linked to deforestation, and again, I believe, very gently, a reminder to all of us in what we do, the WWF and the RSPB estimated that UK import of forest risk commodities, example, soya, beef, leather, coca, account for a land footprint equivalent to 88% of the UK in size every year, which is absolutely massively huge. Just think of what that means to all of us in this world today. Our responsibility is not just for ourselves, but for others, and not just our constituents, who is our first obligation to our families, and also, but to the world family. Mr. Chairman, we have made progress through COP in the past, but it is evident that there is still so much more to be done to have maximum impact. It's important to take our forest risk commodities into consideration and analyse what impact this is having on other countries across the globe. So that's part of our responsibility as a caring nation and as a compassionate people. This can be done collectively within our United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also working alongside our NATO partners. So I look forward very much to hearing from the Minister and what the Minister will say that can be done by our government in this place to take on where we go from here. And not only commitment to our global partners so that we must continue to work together even better, but also taking into consideration the benefits of maintaining a good forestation within our own country for the sake of our environment and climate change commitments. Hope that's the right time, Mr. Chairman. I think it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. I just want to thank the Honourable Member Brent West for bringing this debate. It's a really important issue and one that looms large over us. I want to talk about one specific project, one that could be absolutely devastating for the global climate and biodiversity. We always talk about the Amazon, but the world's third largest rainforest is in fact on the island of Papua in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. And a huge shadow looms over Indonesia's forests. We've seen recent media coverage in the British, Indonesian, international press about an initiative which has been described as the world's largest deforestation project. This project, which is backed by directly by the Indonesian government, is targeting 3 million hectares of moist tropical forest, dry forest, mangrove and wetland for conversion to huge commercial rice and sugar cane plantations in the district of Merauke, West Papua. That's an area 1.5 the size of Wales, or, as there are so many members, including myself, with strong Yorkshire connections, 3 Yorkshires. The project, backed directly by the Indonesian government, also has similar projects in Borneo and Sumatra, which are threatening orangutans, tigers and other critically endangered species. Battalions of soldiers from the Indonesian military have been deployed to clear land and quell resistance from local and indigenous communities, many of whom strongly oppose the project but lack the rights and means to protest. West Papua in particular is highly militarised territory, effectively under military occupation and rule. Community leaders who object face violence and intimidation in the landscape already marred as I've said, by conflict actually that is now 60 years old. The communities are also not even being recompensed properly for the land. There are reports that some communities are being forced to sell concessions within the state plantation for £5 an acre. The value of the timber alone should make the land worth many hundreds of times more than this. Indonesia actually has a long history of failed mega projects. Similar past mega projects absolutely failed, and that is because draining wetlands makes the soil more acidic and farming more difficult. Once cleared, vast stretches of forest are abandoned and burned, which we've previously seen in the Amazon as well. Natural forests and indigenous people rely on hunting and gathering, and also from waste wood for burning for cooking, and that increases malnutrition, disease, and obviously the whole lifestyle of those indigenous people. And from an environmental point of view, the projects will destroy globally critical habitats, triggering irreversible ecosystem degradation at a vast scale. It's estimated that just this one project in Papua will release an estimated additional 782.5 million tonnes of CO2, equivalent to a carbon loss valued at £2.1 billion. That means the Merowaka Food and Energy Estates alone could more than double Indonesia's emissions. Indonesia, like the UK, are signed up to Paris and COP, as well as actually to CBD protocols as well. Such astonishing figures threaten to completely undo any progress Indonesia made in reducing deforestation, and also undermine the UK government's efforts to help the country drive down forest loss and meet its climate targets. Already 10,000 hectares of land have been destroyed, but that is a minute amount compared to what we could see. Now, where does the UK come in? In November 2024, the governments of the UK and Indonesia agreed to work together under a new strategic partnership designed to provide a framework grounded in the principles of mutual respect and cooperation to deliver the full potential of our relationship, as well as one that engages our respective business, academia and research institutions, cultural organisations and wider societies. In addition to these closer political, economic and societal ties, Indonesia is an important partner for the UK in advancing our shared global climate commitments, particularly with regard to protection of forests. The UK, through programmes like the Forestry, Land Use and Governance FLAG programme, is working with Indonesia to address deforestation and promote sustainable forest management to combat climate change. The work is of critical importance and has contributed to a significant decrease in deforestation since 2020. And I would also like to pay tribute to the former Minister Lord Goldsmith, who I've discussed this matter many times, including at COPs. And just following from the point that the Honourable Member from Brent West made, when Schedule 17 is finally implemented under the Environment Act, it should ensure that products containing palm oil or cocoa, which could well end up being part of this plantations because actually this land is not at all suitable for rice growing, that have been grown on recently deforested land, such as Merowaka, should not be sold in the UK. That is the intent, and it is long overdue that Schedule 17 is implemented. So today, and I know that this, again, the Honourable Member from Brent West raised this point, this matter sits across a number of different government departments, but as we're in a DEFRA debate, I will address them to the DEFRA Minister. So considering all of this, does the UK government plan, with this new partnership framework with Indonesia, and also, as it stated, a respectful but critical friend to Indonesia, does it intend to provide technical analysis, advice and support to help the government find alternative solutions to meeting the country's food and energy needs that do not require setting off such an absolute climate time bomb as the Merowaka project? And given the UK's global forest agenda and its leadership role in the Glasgow Declaration, existing trade partnerships, does the Minister believe it's an opportunity for the UK government to take diplomatic action regarding this colossal project, not just on deforestation level, but also its absolutely devastating impact on Indigenous communities? Thank you.
So Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. And can I congratulate my honourable friend, and in this context he is a friend, for raising a matter of paramount importance. It's going to affect the future of our children and our grandchildren. I'm fortunate enough to have 5 of the latter. I decided to participate in this debate, having received yesterday a work of fiction in the form of a briefing note from the Drax organisation. And I also, yesterday, had the good fortune to meet with 2 charming ladies, Dr. Crystal Martin and Catherine Egland, both from the United State of Mississippi, where Drax has an operation that is impacting hugely upon their lives and the lives of their communities. Mr. Vickers, I'm a simple man, and I find long equations hard to follow. But it does strike me that if you fell carbon sequestering trees, using power to fell the trees, if you then turn the wood using power into pellets, if you then transport those pellets across the United States, either by water or by land, and if you then further transport those pellets across the Atlantic in diesel-powered boats, then the chances are you're using quite a lot of carbon. And it strikes me that for Drax to claim that somehow their operation is carbon friendly has to be a myth. But then, of course, one of my wiser colleagues reminded me that for Drax, the clock starts ticking when the pellets arrive at the power station gates, and everything that goes before is written off. This is an absolute nonsense. It has been subsidised by the British taxpayer to a very considerable extent under the previous government. And to give credit where it's credit's due, I believe that the current government has secured a rather better deal than the previous one did. But nevertheless, these practices are still being subsidised to a ridiculous extent. I give away.
First of all, I'd like to correct the record, Mr Vickers, if that's possible, because my honourable friend is anything but simple. He has always been a leading light in every debate he makes. But I would like to say in my constituency, we have a reclamation of wood which then gets turned into pellets. It's wood that would be going into landfill, but unfortunately the government's subsidy to enable them to do it is about to end, making the situation he describes ever more perverse.
I think the honourable lady, if I may say so, makes an unassailable point. But this should not be happening. Drax is felling trees in the southern states of the United States, in Mississippi, in Alabama, in Louisiana, and throughout Canada on an unimaginable scale. They claim that they are using pulpwood from thinnings which have helped to open up the forest canopy and let light onto the forest floor. Oh no, they're not. They're engaged in scorched earth forestry. They are felling acres and acres of woodland in the southern states and in Canada, and that is not acceptable, and it is being subsidised by the British government. But worse, the local populations in Louisiana, in Alabama, in Mississippi are being directly adversely affected in terms of their health by the practices of Drax. Drax have lied, and there is no other word for it, to secure their contracts and their licenses. I shall do my damnedest to ensure that those licenses or renewal of them are contested every way. But I would urge the Minister, please, to go back to her government, particularly to the Department of Energy, to expose the myth that is Drax and to insist that we must find viable alternatives, not tomorrow, but now.
could restrict themselves to 4 minutes from now, we'll fit everyone in. Joe Morris.
Thank you, Chairship, and can I just congratulate Honourable Member for Brent West, my old friend for Brent West, for securing this important debate. When I was working for UK Steel, it was always a pleasure to get in touch with him about carbon sequestration from steel. Especially speaking now about deforestation. Deforestation doesn't simply cut down trees, it cuts off food chains, it collapses ecosystems, drives animals from their homes. It is, as your member's just been saying, a global crisis that will have impacts that reverberate down generations. It's a devastating loss to our planet that up to 15 billion trees are being cut down every year right across the world. It doesn't only destroy the homes of vital species, and I want to put on record my thanks to Northumberland College at Kirkley Hall Zoo, who kindly hosted me shortly after my election to talk about the great work they do in preserving biodiversity. It's contributing hugely to the deeply concerning examples of climate change that we're seeing. I do want to quickly place on record my support for responsible forestry industry. I've got a lot of it in Hexham constituency, in my constituency, and I see the jobs it provides, the employment it provides, the certainty it provides to local communities, and recognise the Great Northumberland Forest, a plan to plant millions of trees, ones that's commanded genuine cross-party support in my part of the world. I'm conscious that on Thursday we've got local elections, but I think we can get together with the Tory group at Morpeth and recognise that they do have some good ideas occasionally. But we do need to recognise that we can't fight climate change simply by sacrificing biodiversity. In fact, we need to be embracing it. Currently, we are stripping away the lungs of our planet and the homes of irreplaceable wildlife, sacrificing the Amazon and other great forests like it at the altar of industrial agriculture, as land being carved out for cattle and soy at the expense of our planet's future. And I'm conscious that the Minister is not going to be able to speak on issues affecting the Department for Business and Trade. But I would just urge her, when she has those conversations, that we don't just look at how we preserve and protect, rightly so, our high food standards, but that also when we're looking at procurement within the UK supply chain, when we're looking at procurement for the UK government, that we're looking at transport emissions, that we're looking at other emissions incurred by goods that are brought out of the planet using suboptimal methods, and ensure that wherever possible we are using the best methods for getting products into the UK, for making sure that they're produced to a high standard from wherever they come from. Something that comes across in my inbox an awful lot. I also feel incredibly fortunate, going back onto Northumberland, to have grown up surrounded by that landscape. We need to make sure that we're preserving the landscape, not just in Northumberland, but across the world, and to make sure that when we protect our climate, we're confronting deforestation head-on. I note the comments from the Honourable Member for Brent West and from other honourable members who've got far more experience than I do in this about the practices of certain large corporations. And just to touch briefly on my previous life working in the steel sector, as we look at the use of timber and the use of lumber, these are products that sequester carbon far more effectively. We need to have a truly honest conversation with ourselves about how the 1.5 million new homes target can be achieved using products that are far kinder to the environment, that provide jobs right here at home and provide environmental benefits right across the world. Thank you.
Chair, it's a pleasure to serve on the chairship and speak in this debate. I want to put on record that I am the chair of the Wood Panel APPG. Now, our global forests are not just the world's lungs, but are helping manage the worst effects of climate change. They lock in carbon, maintain biodiversity and help manage flooding. However, the UK's domestic forestry planting has been in decline since the 70s, where it peaked at 30,000 hectares per year. Given the length of time required for a tree to grow to maturity, this is an issue that we need to consider now. The UK Government has committed to planting 30,000 hectares per annum by 2030, which is to be welcomed. 20,500 hectares of newly created woodland were reported across the UK in 23-24, but we also need to consider the different types of forestry planting and the importance of both productive commercial forestry and broadleaf. Manufacturing from timber is an important form of carbon sequestration, but whilst recent statistics show a year-on-year increase in forestry planting, the amount of productive forestry has decreased by 4.5%. This is limiting the ability of the wood panel industry, amongst others, to meet customer demand. At present, it can only meet 65% of customer demand from domestic sources. If the industry had a secure supply, it would be able to satisfy 100% of demand. To reduce reliance on exports, the UK and devolved governments must achieve their tree planting targets and commit to 60% new planting being productive species such as conifers. Wood panel products manufactured in the UK recycle waste wood into everyday products in our homes, such as our kitchens, our cabinets and our furniture. The volume of waste wood going to energy, such as woody biomass, has increased substantially over the last decade, and this is limiting the availability of waste wood available to the wood panel industry and other wood recycling industries. The wood panel industry is a British manufacturing success story, with British products made from British timber supplying the UK's biggest brands such as B&Q, Jewson, Wicks and Howdens. The industry is also one of the UK's most productive manufacturing sectors, at 2.5 times more productive than the UK industrial average, and generates an estimated annual turnover of £1.4 billion. The wood panel industry generates £287 million for the Exchequer annually through production taxes across the wood panel industry and its supply chain, taxes from employee spending and income tax, as well as national insurance contributions. More tree planting will help this industry become self-sufficient, reduce imports and will be better for the environment. However, failure to meet tree planting targets risks direct job losses in forestry, nursery, silviculture sectors. Indirectly, it threatens employment in wood processing, environmental services and rural economies. Reduced timber supply and weakened climate commitments may also deter investment, undermining long-term job security and economic sustainability in related industries.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. As co-chair of the APPG on global deforestation, I also thank my honourable friend for Brent West for bringing this important topic to Parliament today. He's been a strong voice and champion for our environment for many years. Protecting and restoring forests around the world is not just about climate and nature, although those are vital. It's also about safeguarding communities and livelihoods, both globally and here in the UK. It's been nearly 4 years since the Environment Act passed into law, but we're still waiting for one of its most crucial elements, the implementation of Schedule 17 and the due diligence regulations needed to ensure that UK supply chains are no longer linked to illegal deforestation abroad. British consumers want to know that when they spend their hard-earned pounds, they are part of the solution, not the problem. And people in South East Cornwall want to be part of building a cleaner, brighter future. Once enacted, regulations such as these will make it unlawful for large businesses operating in the UK to use products not produced in accordance with local laws in their country of origin. They will require those businesses to establish due diligence systems to assess and mitigate risks and to report with transparency on their findings. And since the Environment Act was passed, the UK imports alone have been linked to over 39,000 hectares of deforestation. To put that into context, there are more MPs in this House than there are Sumatran tigers left on Earth, and that is a crisis. We know that forests are the green lungs of our planet, and alongside our oceans, they absorb vast amounts of carbon dioxide emitted across the world every day, every month, every year. They hold 80% of the world's land-based biodiversity and support the livelihoods of 1.6 billion people globally. And I know this government is supportive of nature and of the efforts to protect and restore our natural spaces, of forest dwellers and of economic development. But we need greater clarity on when these regulations will be introduced and how they will meet our global commitments to halt and reverse deforestation. Some British businesses are already trying to do the right thing. What they need is clear, consistent rules. And the public is with us too. Polling by WWF shows that 70% of British people support government action to prevent the sales of products linked to these activities. So moving forward, we have to be fair and inclusive. The UK Forest Risk Commodities regulations could inadvertently harm smallholder farmers within global supply chains, many of whom are already struggling. So we have to ensure that this policy empowers rather than excludes, promotes fair compliance costs, living incomes and meaningful engagement with producers, especially those without formal land titles. And closer to home, we have to ensure that these changes do not increase food costs for UK households at a time when many are already struggling. Public food procurement, which accounts for 2.4 billion every year, must support our environmental goals, not undermine them. And public pounds spent should help deliver on climate and nature protection. That's what the public wants, and I know that's what this government wants too. Farmers, both here and abroad, are part of that solution. In South East Cornwall, we're proud of those brilliant farmers working every day to feed our communities and steward our land. And agriculture must be part of that sustainable future. means supporting practices and restoring nature. We know that UK action alone is not enough to protect forests, and we must work in lockstep with key partners such as Brazil, China, the DRC and others to keep these forests standing. And those bilateral relationships between the UK and our global partners are key. Brazil is home to a third of the world's remaining primary tropical forests and will host COP30 in November. Reports of forests being felled to build roads for the Belém Climate Summit are alarming, and so too is the extent that human activities are impacting on that. Unless we can make progress at COP30 on enforcing supply chain rules and holding financial institutions accountable, our window of opportunity to end forest loss is at risk. So can the Minister confirm that the government, while supporting the Brazilian presidency, will take on that huge task and ensure that they're pushing for the most ambitious outcomes on forest protection? I want to see a mention of joint action on global deforestation in the recent UK-China climate dialogue, and I understand that the government will be launching a new UK-China environment dialogue later this year, which is a good opportunity to have that mentioned. And could the Minister confirm that she will discuss that with them? I was recently proud to meet with members of the public from the Congo who are calling on the government to halt oil and gas expansion. And given the DRC's oil minister's announcement, can the Minister assure members that work will be done with partners in those key global areas to ensure the safeguard of the Congo Basin's future? Because time is not on our side. So when will the government introduce these long overdue legislation to implement Schedule 17 and ensure that the UK is part of that bright future? Thank you.
Champion.
Thank you, Mr Vickers, and it's always a pleasure to serve under your guidance. And I thank the Honourable Member for Brent West for bringing this debate today, which seems very poignant on the day the Climate Committee says we're not going to be reaching our targets. I'm going to focus on one issue which builds on a topic that has been mentioned by the member for South East Cornwall. It's an important issue and one where the United Kingdom can demonstrate real leadership, and that is tackling illegal deforestation linked to the UK supply chain. Yeah. In the Environment Act of 2021, Parliament rightly included a requirement for due diligence provisions to prevent larger business from using forest risk commodities that contribute to illegal deforestation. These regulations are crucial to meeting our commitments to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. Yet today, it is more than 1,100 days since the consultation on implementation closed, and the due diligence regulations remain unpublished and unimplemented. Every hour that passes, an area of rainforest equivalent to 300 football pitches is cleared, often to make way for unsustainable agricultural practices. This destruction is not only exacerbating climate change, but it is pushing precious wildlife such as orangutans, tigers, rhinoceroses, hornbills and elephants towards extinction. Indeed, as my honourable friend has said, there are now more MPs in Westminster than there are Sumatran tigers left on Earth. A sobering and powerful reminder of what is at stake. As chair of the APPG of Zoos and Aquariums, I'm pleased that Chester Zoo, one of the world's leading conservation organisations, has been at the forefront of efforts to champion sustainable palm oil and combat deforestation. They're leading the way in creating the world's first sustainable palm oil city in Chester, and have worked with plantation owners in Malaysia and Borneo to restore over 200 hectares of rainforest, reconnecting fragmented landscapes and protecting our critical wildlife corridors. Their real and practical experience makes them an invaluable voice on this issue. It's no surprise that DEFRA officials previously visited the zoo to consult their experts and even filmed content for what was intended to be the regulation's public launch. This launch was postponed due to the general election, but proves that the due diligence regulation is sitting on a desk somewhere waiting to be published. The delay in publication and implementation risks sending entirely the wrong message to businesses seeking certainty, to our international partners and to the public who rightly expect us to lead on this. Chester Zoo, alongside others, is calling not for endless revisions of proposals, but for the government to introduce their version of the regulations without further delay. Just last week, the EU have proposed to adapt their deforestation regulations to streamline their implementation. In my view, this shows that the UK government should be moving faster on implementing their regulations to bring this certainty. A practical, balanced approach would be for them to bring forward a formal review in 12 months after implementation, allowing us to address any operational challenges and assess the compatibility with the EU's deforestation regulation. Mr Vickers, this is a moment when we can turn our commitments into reality. Introducing these regulations now would honour the spirit of the Environment Act, provide much-needed clarity to businesses and show the United Kingdom remains determined to protect the world's precious forests and wildlife. I urge the Minister to act swiftly and to ensure that trusted voices such as Chester Zoo and BIASA, which is the zoo's membership body, are included in any future reviews so that the regulations are grounded in real conservation and operational experience. Thank you.
I move on to the front bench spokesperson for the Lib Dems, Claire Young.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And thank you to the Honourable Member for Brent West for securing this debate and for giving us such an educational introduction. It's notable that all members have spoken not just with passion but also with a rare unanimity on this topic. Forests are not merely scenic landscapes, they're the lungs of our planet, absorbing more than 7.6 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide annually. They house over 80% of our biodiversity and support the livelihoods of more than 1.6 billion people globally, including many of the world's poorest communities. Yet every year, the World Wildlife Fund estimate we're losing around 15 billion trees. This is a direct threat to our climate targets, our food security and our global stability. World Animal Protection note that as President of COP26, the UK introduced the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use, but in the years since has made little progress. At COP29, leaders reaffirmed the goal to end deforestation by 2030, and we're proud to support that pledge, but words must become action. A number of my Thornbury and Yate constituents have contacted me to express their concern about deforestation, including the children of Old Sudbury Primary School. They highlighted the plight of orangutans and the damage being done by people destroying forests in order to grow palm trees for palm oil, used in soap, shampoo, chocolate and many other toiletries and food. I'm sure they will be pleased to have heard a number of the honourable members express concern about orangutans in this debate. A number of honourable members, including those for Leeds, Central and Headingley and South East Cornwall, set out clearly the damaging impacts of deforestation, including soil acidification, vast carbon emissions and the damage to people who depend on those forests, including some of the poorest in the world. The new Labour government has pledged stronger regulations to prevent UK businesses from fuelling illegal deforestation through their supply chains. And as the member for Rotherham set out, every day of delay allows more trees and the species that rely on them to be destroyed. So I'd like to ask the Minister, when will they put these regulations forward? Liberal Democrats would support the introduction of a Business, Human Rights and Environment Act to require companies to take adequate measures and due diligence to prevent and manage the impacts of activities on people and the environment, both in the UK and around the world. So I'd like to ask the Minister, would she go further and introduce a general duty of care for the environment and human rights, requiring companies, financial institutions and public sector agencies to exercise due diligence in avoiding specified products such as commodities produced with deforestation in their operations and supply chains and to report on their actions. The Honourable Member for Herne Bay and Sandwich raised the issue of DRACs. I myself had a robust conversation with proponents of biomass energy production at one of the many drop-ins that happen in Parliament, and it illustrates why we need to look at whole life cycle emissions, not simply consumption emissions, as the Honourable Member for Hexham pointed out. Under the previous Conservative government, the UK continued to subsidise biomass energy production, particularly at the Drax power station. It burns the equivalent of 27 million trees a year, and while classed as renewable under current definitions, this is both inefficient and ecologically damaging. Lib Dems oppose the continued declassification of biomass as renewable energy and would like to see this changed by this government so that we can focus on genuine renewables like wind and solar. We should not forget the problems on our own doorstep, and I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for giving us a Northern Ireland perspective on this. Here in England, The Woodland Trust has said that we have some of the lowest woodland cover in Europe at just 10%, far behind the European average of 38%. In my own Thornbury and Yate constituency, where the Liberal Democrats lead on the climate and nature emergency, the council is part of a partnership that has won a bid for the Western Forest to become a new national forest. It will serve over 2.5 million people, and the aim is to plant 2,500 hectares of new woodland in the first 5 years, with an aspiration to plant 20 million trees by 2050. The Liberal Democrats committed last year to doubling woodland cover by 2050, and I hope this will make a contribution to that. The Honourable Member for Kilmarnock and Loudoun made a good point, though, about the types of planting being important. To conclude, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that protecting and restoring forests is essential to limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And organisations from the World Wildlife Fund to the Tree Council have warned us delay is no longer an option. Forests don't recognise borders, and neither does climate change. To protect nature, we must act globally, act boldly, and act now. According to the UN, we lose approximately 10 million hectares of forest a year, which is roughly the size of Portugal. And as a result of the previous Conservative government's policies, the World Wildlife Foundation and Global Forest Watch ranked the UK in the bottom third of G7 nations for its overall progress on halting imported deforestation. The COP29 declaration reaffirmed the global goal of ending deforestation by 2030. This is not a distant crisis, it is happening now, and it threatens all of us. So I call on this government to act with urgency and vision, stop subsidising environmental destruction, implement rigorous supply chain standards, and work with global partners to safeguard forests around the world. The world cannot afford half measures. We need real action to stop deforestation now.
Shadow Minister, Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Vickers, and it's a great pleasure to serve today under your chairmanship. May I thank everyone today for their important contribution in today's debate, and of course to my very good friend, the Honourable Member for Brent West, for bringing this important debate to us today. I must say I have extremely fond memories of our time serving together as members of the EFRA Select Committee in the previous Parliament. Caring deeply about the world we live in, our precious environment, the people and the creatures that live within it, is something that unites us in humanity across this chamber. And given his clear and passionate commitment to the natural environment, it is no surprise he has chosen to bring a topic like this to Westminster Hall today. And I again thank him for doing so and congratulate him on his thoughtful and indeed powerful speech. We've had some excellent contributions today from across the House, members from Strangford, the Honourable Member for Leeds Central and Headingley, talking powerfully about things going on in Indonesia. My right honourable friend, the member for Herne Bay and Sandwich, a powerful speech on the implications of Drax, from Hexham, from Kilmarnock and Loudoun, and from the right honourable member for Rotherham, powerful advocate for the work of Chester Zoo, and I'm going to talk about that later. Mr Vickers, as the Member of Parliament for Epping Forest, it's an honour to speak for His Majesty's most loyal opposition on protecting our precious forests. My constituents in Epping Forest know the importance of Epping Forest as the heart and lungs for North East London and our part of Essex. As members today across the House have highlighted, it is absolutely vital that we address the drivers and risks of global deforestation. Deforestation is the second leading cause of climate change globally and is responsible for approximately 10 to 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions, nearly as much as all the world's vehicles combined. To put it starkly, if deforestation were a country, it would rank third behind only China and the USA for carbon dioxide emissions. Forests host approximately 80% of the world's wildlife on land, and in the last 60 years, more than half of tropical forests globally have been destroyed, reducing biodiversity and endangering species. And alarmingly, it is estimated that every hour, so less than the length of this debate, an area of rainforest equivalent to 300 football pitches is cleared to make way for unsustainable palm oil production, not only contributing to climate change, but also leading to a huge decline in precious wildlife like orangutan, tigers and elephants, jeopardising their very survival as species. I want to put on record my thanks and tribute to the great work of Chester Zoo. We've heard about this earlier today. And indeed all zoos across the world for their work on conservation of species, but particularly today Chester Zoo for their work on a responsible sourcing policy for the use of sustainable palm oil, produced with the lowest possible environmental impact and without deforestation. The facts and figures that we have heard today are truly shocking and leave us in no doubt of the urgent need to tackle deforestation and the threat it poses to a cleaner, greener world that is left in a better state than we found it. While there have been positive steps in the right direction in recent years, including a significant reduction in deforestation in some countries, there is still clearly much to do. For example, a 2024 report by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations found that while rates of deforestation have declined in forest-rich countries such as Brazil and in Indonesia, but there are still problems there, we must remember, climate change is making forests more vulnerable to abiotic and biotic stresses, such as wildfires and pests. And with demand for wood projected to significantly increase by 2050, it is more important than ever that the government ensures the UK continues to play a leading role in protecting the world's forests. Now, as the Minister will know, I'm proud to say that the previous Conservative government had a strong record on tackling deforestation both at home and abroad, cementing the UK's position as a global leader. We passed the landmark Environment Act in 2021 and supported the recovery of England's globally rare temperate rainforests, while playing an important role in supporting efforts to reduce global deforestation. In the Amazon, for example, under the previous government, the UK became one of the largest contributors to Brazil's Amazon Fund and supported measures to address the underlying drivers of deforestation. This is not to mention the important work that we spearheaded during the UK's COP26 presidency, including securing a commitment from 141 countries representing over 90% of the world's forests to work collectively to halt and reverse loss and land degradation by 2030. Now, we've heard that those commitments were made, but we need to hold people to account on this. I was privileged myself to have attended COP26 and see the previous government in action working hard on the global stage to tackle deforestation and more widely to look at sustainable ways of using our land, including in agriculture, and make them more affordable and achievable across the world. International cooperation is the only way countries across the world can tackle the threat to our planet and livelihoods that deforestation and climate change more widely pose. Furthermore, at the COP28 Nature Day in December 2023, the Conservative government set out plans to ensure that supermarket essentials are no longer linked to illegal deforestation. I'd be grateful if the Minister could provide an update on this important work and the government's plans to ensure the UK continues to lead international action to protect the planet's forests. Experts have recently warned that governments must take immediate steps if we are to meet the important commitment to restore the world's forests by 2030, with a key recommendation being that countries must strengthen trade agreements and regulations to stop deforestation-linked products from entering global markets. What assessment has the Minister made of such reports, and what plans does her department have to ensure the UK is promoting deforestation-free trade? Now, speaking of upholding our environmental standards worldwide in our agreements and in trade, it is important we likewise uphold other standards in trade agreements, such as animal welfare standards, not least in the current negotiations with the United States. We must hold firm on banning the importation of chlorine-washed poultry, ractopamine-fed pork, and hormone-treated beef and dairy. These are red lines, not only for the sake of animal and bird welfare, but also for our fantastic UK farmers too, who farm to the highest standards of animal welfare and must not be undercut in an attempt to cut a deal. This is not about protectionism. This is standing up for our values. And in that, we, the United Kingdom, can be a beacon to the world, driving up animal health and welfare standards globally. Could the Minister perhaps confirm that the current government will do all they can to uphold environmental and animal welfare standards internationally in their international trade negotiations? Now, back with global deforestation, the previous government introduced world-leading due diligence provisions to help address illegal deforestation across UK supply chains through our groundbreaking Environment Act. Ministers in the current government have said that they will set out an approach to ensuring UK consumption of so-called forest risk commodities, such as beef, soy and palm oil, is not driving deforestation. And they've said they will do this in due course, but they are yet to do so. So can the Minister today provide an update on this? And will she confirm if the government plans to introduce the necessary secondary legislation to enact measures in the Environment Act in key areas like Schedule 17? As the Minister will be aware, campaigners are urging the government to introduce such secondary legislation before COP30 this November. This is spurred on by recent reports that the UK's imports of forest risk commodities are linked to forest destruction to the size of major cities like Newcastle, Liverpool or Cardiff over the last year. I acknowledge that the process has not been without its difficulties, but can the Minister set out a timeline for introducing necessary secondary legislation? Finally, Mr Vickers, I would like to mention forest finance. The previous government doubled the UK's commitment to international climate finance to £11.6 billion from 2021-22 to 2025-26. ICF funding has been an important part of the UK's work to protect the world's forests, enabling us to work side by side with Brazil to tackle deforestation in all 9 Amazon states and carefully monitor deforestation across the Amazon region. As we know, the government has recently announced that there will be a reduction in funding for overseas development, but it has yet to give details of the projects and initiatives that it will be funding. It is therefore unclear what, if any, projects relating to the rainforest, biodiversity and the protection of sensitive ecosystems that the UK government will support. What engagement has the Minister had with colleagues in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office on such funding? And will the Minister shed some light on the government's funding priorities with regard to tackling global deforestation? In conclusion then, Mr Vickers, it is clear that there is consensus right across this House that serious cross-party efforts need to be taken to address the threat of global deforestation around the world. While much has been done, there is still so much more that needs to be done, both by the government and in collaboration with nations around the world to protect our precious environment, the people and the creatures that live within it. I look forward from hearing from the Minister how the government intends to pick up the baton from the previous Conservative government and deliver these global environmental protections for the sake of our planet and for generations to come.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Vickers, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship today. Can I begin by congratulating my honourable friend for Brent West on securing this debate on such an important issue and for taking us to the Amazon forest and its river, its atmospheric river. A brilliant sort of poetic way to talk about the aerial rivers that forests produce and a really important way of explaining the ecosystem services. I sometimes think we talk about it as though it's an economic asset, which of course it is, but we're not very good at the poetry. And we know that trees bring us peace, they bring us shade and they bring us joy, as well as all the other stuff. And I think it's really important that we talk about the emotional and spiritual connections that trees bring to people and to places, the threats that they face from deforestation, whether legal or illegal, and I do very much take his point about illegal versus legal deforestation. That is an observation that I too have noted about the previous government's approach. And to say that this nation is afforesting, as our honourable friend, the member for Kilmarnock and Loudon stated, we are planting a new national forest, the Western Forest, which the honourable lady for Thornbury and Yate mentioned, and I was delighted to go down there and plant a crabapple tree as part of the agroforestry part of that, but that forest is going to deliver flood prevention services and also critically link up ancient woodland which has become fragmented in the landscape. So it's going to stretch from the Forest of Dean right the way down to the Mendip Hills. It's truly a massive undertaking. We are here today to talk about deforestation, and the fact that it touches on so many different departments covering DBT, DESNES, I have a DESNES official with me in the box as well as my DEFRA officials, the fact that 3 ministers are responsible for international forestry, FCDO, DESNES and myself, shows some of the complexity around this and explains why I have about 25 different notes in my hand. So I do have a prepared speech. I am going to try and deliver it, but I am also going to try and answer questions as we go along. If you feel that we're getting to 5-2 and you haven't had satisfaction, do please, I would ask people to intervene on me, but I will try and get through my notes. So first of all, tackling the climate and nature crises is central to the UK's national interest, both for security and prosperity. So our forests are a strategic asset, and protecting them is absolutely fundamental to achieving the government's vision for a world free from poverty on a livable planet. And as my honourable friend has said, nature is the monopoly provider of everything we need to exist. And it's not that it's not a subsection of the economy. It is, the economy is a subsection of nature. Over £1 billion people rely on forests for sustenance and their livelihoods. And we have heard in the many passionate and brilliant speeches from colleagues here today that forests provide food, energy, water and medicines worldwide and play a vital role in global economic resilience. They host most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, including the slightly terrifying giant otters from the Amazon, which you can see at Chester Zoo. Never seen anything like that. Utterly terrifying animals, quite like something out of a Jurassic Park film. They are the size of like a Great Dane, quite terrifying for those of us who are used to the more manageable British otter. They have rare and endangered species, and of course plants essential for modern medicines. Almost everything that we have, whether it's aspirin from willow, whether it's heart medicines from Foxglove digitalis, have come from ancient herbal and medical practices. And the Cali Fund is an important statement at the Biodiversity COP. Setting up the Cali Fund is a way of those pharmaceutical, cosmetic and beauty companies who profit from these discoveries and who now have access to the data sequenced internationally on this to make a contribution to protect and preserve the future discoveries of medicine and of the beauty industry and the cosmetics industry, because their future, innovations are literally on fire. We will be launching the Cali Fund, so I'm very pleased that our officials, UK officials, led the establishment of the Cali Fund, as honourable members know, but that fund will be officially launched by us at London Climate Week in June this year, and I do hope that we will be able to say more about that in due course. And I would also just like to say that we are hosting the IPPES, the International Biodiversity Panel of Expert Scientists. I can't quite remember the name, but it's the IPCC for nature, and that conference is going to be held in England in 2026 in February, and we hope to sort of make an official announcement about that. So we're going to have a very, very big year for nature next year. We know forests are major carbon sinks. 662 billion tonnes of carbon, equivalent to 15 years of human-made emissions, are stored in them, and they cool our planet, providing up to 1 degree of warming at mid-latitudes. I'm going to skip all this. You've made brilliant speeches. You don't need to hear from me again about the problems of deforestation. But time is running out. Deforestation is pushing critical biomes like the Amazon towards potentially catastrophic tipping points from which they will not recover. We are seeing annual Canadian wildfires. We are seeing wildfires here in our own country. We're seeing peat fires. And this is putting a massive strain on forest ecosystems. And I'm as concerned about the collapse of the Russian and Canadian boreal forests, again, another sort of slightly jargonistic word, but these northern forests are as important to our ecosystem services and our wildlife as the sort of tropical megaforests. So it's essential that we protect, restore and manage forests in a cost-effective way to tackle climate change while supporting livelihoods. And often the forest is seen as less economically valuable than other land uses such as cash crops, agriculture, infrastructure, urban development. I remember on a visit to the Eastern Congo in 2008, seeing the Batwa people, the forest people, living in a tea plantation, and their forests had been cut down as a cash crop, and they were living amongst those tea bushes because of the disastrous security situation that pertained to South Kivu at that time. So to halt it, forested communities and countries need money. We talk about financial, it's money to conserve them. It's got to be more positive to conserve than to clear them. And that means three changes: an economic shift that values forests and rewards sustainable practices, governance reforms that support effective forest stewardship and tackle illegal activities, and market transformation here in this country to grow green enterprises, protect nature and enhance local livelihoods. And that means livelihoods in the forested countries, but also changing the way that we as consumers purchase. We've heard about consumer demand leading to 35,000 hectares of forest lost overseas. We import 45% of our food, 80% of our timber. We're the second largest importer in the world after China, and that creates resilience problems going forward into the future. Many sectors are underpinned by forest goods and services, and a loss of forest will disrupt UK supply chains and businesses, pushing up prices for consumers and undermining our national resilience. On the point that the gentleman for Brent West made about the financial industry, I had a meeting with the Financial Conduct Authority yesterday, Sasha Sadan, on this, on these, not specifically on deforestation, but about the role of the sustainability branding of investment managers. And I'm really pleased to say that they, as the regulator, are taking sort of strong and firm action to clean up the greenwashing and make sure that sustainability funds no longer, if they say sustainability, they've got to comply with a certain series of sort of rules and recommendations, which is why many funds have pivoted to stewardship, because they can no longer use sustainability. So just for us all to understand what is happening in the financial context. We are setting significant steps to protect and expand our domestic forests. Our key achievements are our legally binding target to increase tree cover to 16.5% of England's land area by 2050 and planting over 21,000 hectares of woodland across the UK between 23 and 24, including 5,530 hectares in England, the highest rate in a generation. And I think that when we see this year's figures, they will be even higher. So good news on the England tree planting target. There has been some fall away in Scotland, and there has been a slight change in the mix. And I do take on board her point about the need to increase our conifer planting, because that is the productive forest that we need. And I'm going to visit a timber housing construction factory just, I think it's in Kenilworth and Southam on Friday this week, and I'm coming to the Honourable Gentleman's constituency for Hexham. I'm coming for a 3-day visit, because it's so difficult to get to see the brilliant timber production that is going on there, and hopefully also to enjoy a midsummer night sky as well. So that's I've got lots of things to do and to look forward to. Internationally, under previous governments, as colleagues have said, the previous government did persuade partners to commit to halting and reversing deforestation and forest degradation by 2030. We want a just transition for forest-positive economies. That means securing development and Indigenous peoples and local communities' livelihoods while tackling climate change and protecting nature. Through ODA, we support stronger forest governments. I've been asked about ICF. And so what I want to say is we're continuing to support Brazil in its development. We cannot, on the TFFF, first of all, I'll talk about TFFF first. We're supporting Brazil in its development. We cannot commit to an investment while work is still being done to develop the mechanism, but we will, of course, consider it in due course. Forests are a pillar of the UK-Brazil partnership, and we will support Brazilian ambitions for COP30, including through co-chairing the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, which I believe is done by my colleague, the Minister for Tropical Forests, for Climate Change, the Minister for Climate Change. On UK-China relations, we are continuing to work with key partners, including Indonesia and China, to support the UNFCCC's global stocktake objective to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. And we are on TFFF, we're providing technical assistance, and we are involved in all the technical work streams on environmental criteria, financial mechanisms and governance. And from what I've seen of it, it seems to be quite a similar mechanism to the Cali mechanism, which is about trying to crowd in funding from the private sector as well as public finance, because there is a limit to how much public finance can support. Happy to give way.
If you could just clarify whether Indigenous communities are represented on the board of the Cali Fund, that would be really helpful.
I'm afraid I have absolutely no idea, so I'll have to write to him on that. Genuinely, it's not my area. On the Cali Fund, we obviously welcome the positive conclusions to the COP in Rome, and a key the key outcome is the launch of the Cali Fund, which will drive this benefit sharing from the use of DSI, digital sequence information, on genetic resources, allowing companies utilising this information to direct funds towards IPLCs who safeguard biodiversity. And of course, at that biodiversity COP, for the first time, we created the process by which IPLCs now do have a seat at the table, which is very, very important. The Honourable Lady for South East Cornwall raised the UK-Indonesia joint energy transition. We will continue to work with key partners, including Indonesia and China, to support the the stocktake to support the objective to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. Future climate finance, so ICF, is subject to business planning this year, and it's subject to the spending review from next year. And I can genuinely say I'm meeting the Minister for Development this afternoon to discuss our approach on that. So this is all sort of work that is happening at the moment. Congo DRC is a particularly important region, as it has received less attention and less climate finance than the Amazon and Southeast Asia. We're committed to working with others to secure the next phase of supports for forest, people and biodiversity of the Congo Basin countries, which will be announced at COP30, and that will sit alongside the pledge for IPLC's land tenure. We know communities are better able to protect ecosystem when their land rights are secure, and that their areas are managed by IPLCs are better protected than any other areas. The Foreign Secretary has already announced that the UK will lead on this IPLC land tenure pledge. So domestically, we are... I will, very briefly.
Will the Minister be covering the regulations on due diligence?
I'm coming to that. So, legislation complements this. The UK timber regs aims to eliminate the demand for illegally harvested timber. The EU's timber regulation continues to apply unamended in Northern Ireland. Both regs require operators, those who place timber on the market, to implement due diligence and review their supply chains. And a recent review of the UK timber regulations demonstrated that this has led to the reduction of illegal timber in UK supply chains. Over the past 12 years, our delivery partner, the Office for Product Safety and Standards, again DBT, not my area, OPSS, has reviewed the due diligence systems of over 600 businesses, issued 100 warning letters and 100 notices of remedial action. Recent notable enforcement by them includes the prosecution of luxury yacht maker Sunseeker International, which received a fine of £306,000 plus prosecution costs in relation to illegal imports of timber from Myanmar and Africa. At home, government must also abide by the rules that it has made. The government's timber procurement policy requires all government procurers and suppliers to prove the legality and sustainability of timber. And we will only accept sustainable timber, and we have a wider approach to encourage legal and sustainable forestry, both domestically and internationally. We are currently reviewing the TPP policy with the aim of securing better recognition of British certification schemes such as Grown in Britain and Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade Licensed Timber, FLEGT. So we're at a critical moment for forests, and we are at a moment where the international community must go further and faster to tackle, to deliver our ambition. We need to tackle nature loss and enhance planetary stewardship. We're working to unlock more finance for nature, promote deforestation-free agriculture and reform global supply chains. Supporting Indigenous rights and access to finance is also vital, requiring targeted efforts across all tropical forest basins. COP30 in Brazil, home to the world's largest rainforest, will be a pivotal moment. We're working closely with Brazil and other partners to ensure forests and nature are at centre stage. We're partnering Guyana as co-chairs of the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership to build a valuable forum for driving wider ambition. Agricultural expansion, particularly for a few key commodities, is the primary driver of illegal deforestation worldwide. As colleagues have said, the Environment Act in 21 made provision for government to bring forward legislation to exclude commodities. We recognise the urgency of the task to ensure that UK consumption of those commodities...
Barry Gardner.
What's clear from all across this House is that we will not accept any further delay to the due diligence regulations, and it must be based not just...
Considered government policies to limit globalisation. If many of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. So what... The next debate.
It's just time.
Right, well done. He's just arrived.